You don't always lose friends because of a fight. Sometimes you lose them because you finally open your eyes. Dorothy was 74 years old and had lived in Portland most of her life. For over 20 years, her schedule had been predictable: coffee on Tuesdays, lunch on Thursdays, and a book club every Saturday. The same 3 women, the same cafe, the same conversations. Margaret, Susan, and Helen weren't just friends. They were her routine, her habit, her comfort. Or so she believed. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Dorothy parked outside the cafe, sat in her car for a moment, and took a deep breath. Something felt heavy, though she couldn't explain why. She pushed the feeling aside and walked in. Margaret was already seated at their usual table by the window. Dorothy smiled and sat down. Margaret barely looked up. "My daughter got divorced again," Margaret said immediately. Dorothy nodded. She had heard this story many times before. Every detail, every complaint, every sleepless night. Still, she listened. That was her role: to listen, to nod, to comfort. 10 minutes later, Susan arrived, sighing loudly as she dropped into her chair. "At least your daughter talks to you," she said. "My son won't even call anymore." Dorothy opened her mouth to speak, but Susan didn't pause. The complaints poured out: unanswered calls, hurt feelings, imagined slights. Margaret jumped back in, turning it into a quiet competition over who suffered more. No one asked Dorothy how she was. An hour passed before Helen finally arrived, wearing a new designer coat and carrying an air of importance. "Sorry I'm late," she said casually. "I was at the spa." She didn't sound sorry. Helen immediately launched into stories: her grandson's achievements, expensive vacations, plans for Europe. Subtle comments slipped in, sharp enough to sting, but smooth enough to deny. Compliments wrapped in judgment. Advice that felt more like criticism. Dorothy sat quietly, stirring her coffee long after it had gone cold. She realized something unsettling. She felt invisible. 2 full hours passed before the group finally stood to leave. Dorothy smiled politely, said her goodbyes, and walked to her car. As she drove home, her chest felt tight. Her hands gripped the steering wheel harder than usual. Why did every meeting leave her exhausted? Why did she feel smaller every time she walked away? That night, lying awake in bed, a thought crept into her mind, soft but dangerous. What if the people closest to me are the ones draining me the most? And that single question would change everything Dorothy believed about friendship, starting the very next day. The hardest truth Dorothy had to face wasn't about her friends. It was about herself. The morning after coffee, Dorothy woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Robert was still asleep, and sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and replayed the conversation from the cafe, word by word. For years, she had defended those women, not just to others, but to herself. "They don't mean it. They're just stressed. That's just how Helen talks. Those excuses had become second nature. They were easier than admitting something painful. The friendship had stopped being mutual a long time ago. Dorothy pulled out an old notebook where she sometimes wrote her thoughts. But she flipped back through pages filled with grocery lists and reminders, then paused on an entry from months earlier. Coffee with the girls today. Came home tired again. She hadn't noticed it before, but similar lines appeared again and again. Tired, drained. Headache afterwards. That realization landed heavier than she expected. Healthy friendships, she knew, were supposed to feel nourishing, not like emotional labor. Yet every meeting felt like a performance. She listened, she sympathized, she praised, she softened her opinions so no one would feel challenged. And in return, very little. Later that afternoon, Margaret called Dorothy, watched the phone ring. Normally, she would have answered immediately. Instead, she let it go to voicemail. Her heart raced. She felt guilty, then confused by that guilt. Why did protecting her energy feel like a betrayal? The voicemail was exactly what she expected. Complaints, no greeting, no question about Dorothy's day, just noise disguised as connection. For the first time, Dorothy didn't call back right away. That evening, she mentioned it to Robert. "I don't think I enjoy spending time with them anymore," she admitted, almost whispering. Robert folded his newspaper. "You've said that for years," he replied gently. "You just never believed yourself." That sentence stayed with her. Dorothy began noticing other things too. How Helen subtly dismissed her opinions. How Susan only reached out when she needed comfort. How Margaret redirected every conversation back to her own problems. None of it was dramatic. No single moment screamed toxic. That's what made it dangerous. It was a slow erosion, respect wearing away quietly over time. Friendship, Dorothy realized, wasn't supposed to require endurance. And then came the thought she had avoided for decades. What if I don't need these friendships anymore? The idea scared her. At her age, starting over felt risky. People warned her all the time. At this stage of life, you should be grateful for whoever you have. But what if gratitude wasn't supposed to cost her peace? That night, Dorothy made a decision, not a dramatic one, not yet. Just a small promise to herself. She would stop forcing connection where it no longer existed. And that decision would soon test her in a way she never expected. Because the next time the women met, Dorothy did something different, and the reaction shocked her. Sometimes the fastest way to learn your value is to stop offering it for free. The next Thursday, Dorothy went to lunch with the same women, but she went differently. She didn't rehearse stories in her head. She didn't prepare sympathy. She didn't arrive early to set the mood. She simply showed up as she was. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Susan complained about her son. Margaret sighed about her aching knees. Helen criticized the restaurant, the service, and the city parking. Dorothy listened, but she didn't rush to soothe. She didn't interrupt with reassurance. She didn't soften the edges. She stayed quiet. The change was immediate. Susan glanced at her, confused. Margaret paused mid-sentence. Helen frowned, as if something essential was missing from the room. Dorothy felt it clearly now. Her role wasn't friend, it was emotional caretaker. After a few minutes, Margaret finally asked, "Are you okay today? You're awfully quiet." Dorothy smiled politely. "I'm fine, just listening." The conversation stumbled forward awkwardly. Without Dorothy filling the gaps, things grew uncomfortable. Complaints fell flat. Stories ended sooner than expected. There was no warm echo, no gentle validation. And then it happened. Helen made a sharp comment, a familiar one, about Dorothy's quiet life. "You're lucky you don't have much going on," she said lightly. "Less stress, I suppose." It wasn't said cruelly. That's what made it sting. Dorothy felt the old instinct rise, the urge to laugh it off, to agree, to shrink. Instead, she met Helen's eyes and said calmly, "My life feels full to me." The table went silent. No one argued. No one apologized. The conversation simply moved on, but something had shifted. Dorothy could feel it. The balance was broken. When lunch ended, there were no lingering hugs. No, let's do this again soon. Just rushed goodbyes and distracted smiles. That evening, Dorothy waited. No texts, no calls, no concern. Days passed, then a full week. The absence hurt, but it also clarified something she had avoided for years. If her presence was only valued for what she provided, then her absence revealed the truth. These women didn't miss her, they missed what she gave. And that realization came with grief. Dorothy mourned the friendships she thought she had. The shared history, the illusion of closeness. Letting go felt like closing a door on decades of her life, but beneath the sadness, something else appeared: relief. She slept better. Her shoulders felt lighter. The constant anticipation of emotional exhaustion was gone. For the first time, Dorothy asked herself a dangerous but honest question. If I no longer belong to them, who might I become next? Because once Dorothy accepted the loss, life introduced her to something unexpected: peace she didn't know she was allowed to have. Losing people can feel like failure until you realize what you've gained in their absence. The weeks after Dorothy stepped back from her friends felt strangely quiet. At first, the silence unsettled her. She reached for her phone more than once, instinctively ready to check messages that never came. Old habits don't disappear easily, especially ones built over decades. The tension she had accepted as normal simply vanished. One afternoon, she ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store, a woman she barely knew but always liked. They chatted briefly. It was easy, balanced. When they parted, Dorothy realized something startling. She felt energized. That contrast mattered. She began to understand the difference between connection and attachment. Attachment clings out of fear of being alone, forgotten, or judged. Connection, on the other hand, allows space. It doesn't demand performance. The friendships she'd held onto for so long were rooted in habit, not harmony. Sometimes the right people don't arrive until you finally make room for them. Dorothy met Claire at the local library. It wasn't dramatic or instant, just a small conversation near the history shelves, a shared laugh about a misplaced book, a casual comment about the weather. But something about it felt different. There was no competition, no one steering the conversation back to themselves. No subtle judgment hiding behind polite words. They talked for 15 minutes. When they parted, Dorothy felt light, not drained, not anxious, not small. A week later, they ran into each other again. This time, Claire invited Dorothy for tea. Dorothy hesitated, old fears flickering briefly. What if this turns into the same thing? But she went. The afternoon was simple. They took turns speaking. They listened. Silence didn't feel awkward. Laughter came easily. Driving home, Dorothy realized something profound. This is what friendship feels like when it doesn't require survival. Claire didn't need Dorothy to fix her life. She didn't demand constant validation. She didn't treat connection like a transaction. They showed up as equals to women sharing time, not extracting energy. Over the months, their friendship grew naturally. Some weeks they met, some weeks they didn't. There was no guilt, no scorekeeping, no emotional debt. Dorothy noticed how her body responded differently now. No tight chest before meetings, no mental exhaustion afterward, just warmth. And with that warmth came understanding. Letting go of her old friends hadn't been a rejection of others. It was an act of self-respect. She hadn't become cold or selfish. She had become selective. One evening, Dorothy reflected on how close she had come to spending the rest of her life maintaining relationships that quietly diminished her. The thought made her shiver. She didn't regret the past, it taught her, but she no longer felt bound by it. Friendship, she now knew, should expand you, not shrink you. But for the courage it took to create space for it. Because peace is not found by holding on harder,